Over the years since I first started posting film analysis videos, I've had a lot of inquiries from people asking whether I agree with the rumours that Stanley Kubrick filmed the apparently fake moon landings on behalf of NASA. I've touched on aspects of these rumours in some of my previous videos and articles, but for years I've been intending to produce a video giving my full response to the issue. The inquiries I've received generally claim that there's evidence in two Kubrick films, The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Stuff like the Apollo sweater worn by the character Danny, and the idea that front screen projection was used to place fake backgrounds behind the astronauts in the moon landing footage, similar to how it was used to project backgrounds behind these ape characters in 2001: A Space Odyssey. The ape scenes were filmed on sound stages here in Britain. So for this video I've gathered from various online sources and my backlog of correspondence emails a list of the evidence that is most commonly used to argue that Kubrick filmed the moon landings, and I've gathered some other details from my own studies of Kubrick films to hopefully shed some more light on the subject. Let me first just say though that this isn't going to be a video simply calling the whole Kubrick moon landing theory a conspiracy theory. That would be the most predictable, boring and uninsightful response I could give. The truth about big, persistent conspiracy theories usually lies somewhere in the middle ground between the believers and the debunkers. It's usually the case that something is going on, but not quite what the believers or debunkers are thinking, and it's usually a more complex state of affairs that denies an easy logical victory for either side. I'm also not going to try and claim in this video that the moon landings were or weren't real. That's a whole complex subject with many arguments from both sides. Decades of debate and documentaries and published books have failed to sway public opinion one way or the other. For me, the question I hope to try and answer is whether Kubrick himself believed the moon landings were faked, and whether he tried to communicate this in his films or otherwise. There is something going on with Kubrick and the moon landings in some of his films, but I want to get the garbage out the way first, so I'm going to start with a full-on debunk of the interpretation that The Shining is a confession from Kubrick about filming fake moon landings. The best piece of evidence in The Shining, in fact it's the only piece of evidence as far as I can tell that even remotely refers to the moon landings, is Danny's Apollo sweater. Yes, the moon landing mission was an Apollo mission, Apollo 11 to be precise, and yes, Danny's sweater appears to say Apollo 11 USA. The sweater is blue with yellow stars symbolising space, and it's all depicted in a childlike, cartoonish fantasy manner. And when Danny stands, yes, it does look like a sort of blast-off from the ground. And that's a great start to the theory about Kubrick and the moon landings in this film, but we'll come back to that later. Now put yourself in Stanley's shoes. If you were going to encode a message in The Shining that the film is about the fake moon landings, specifically about Stanley confessing to filming the fake moon landings, then there are a number of options for encoding that message. For one thing, you could make sure to get shots of the moon itself into some of the exterior night shots of the hotel. Or you could have Danny play with astronaut figures and toy rockets. He could have colouring books with pictures of the moon landings. You could get posters with images of the moon into lots of the sets. Or Danny could engage in dialogue with his parents about a trip to the moon, maybe in the form of a bedside story. Another example is Jack's scrapbook. Some have claimed that Jack is secretly writing a confession about the moon landings, Jack representing Kubrick himself. Yet, at the Kubrick Archives in London, I found that a quick sift through this awesome book reveals that it contains hundreds of newspaper clippings relating to facets of US history, mainly to do with the Federal Reserve Bank, the gold standard, and World War I and II. A clear thematic revelation in itself. So if the movie was about fake moon landings, then why didn't Kubrick fill Jack's scrapbook with moon landing stories? And instead of using black and white archived pictures of US bankers and politicians to adorn the walls in the sets, including the iconic final photo, why not have pictures of NASA personnel involved in the moon landing missions? But no, Kubrick didn't do any of this stuff. Basically, aside from Danny's sweater, I have found nothing, no images of the moon or anything else relating to the moon landings anywhere in the movie, nor any dialogue references to it. And that doesn't support the case for a fake moon landing theme. Think of it this way, it's much more accepted that The Shining has a theme of Native American genocide, and that's because that interpretation isn't based on a single moment in the movie, such as the Native American painting outside Ullman's office. There are other such images of Native Americans, and there are Native American designs built into the hotel. And there are two separate dialogue references to Native Americans.
Are all these Indian designs authentic?
Yeah, I believe based mainly on Navajo and Apache motifs.
Oh, well, they're really gorgeous.
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground, and I believe they actually had to repel a few Indian attacks as they were building it.
All of these are unmistakable references to Native Americans. They don't rely on perceptual distortion. Slightly more open to perception are the native chanting-like elements in the soundtrack as well. Kubrick has given multiple clues about the native genocide theme so that when they're collectively noticed and cross-referenced, the theme becomes near enough a verifiable certainty. So if the core message of the film was about the moon landings, then why is Danny's sweater the only verifiable reference to the moon landings? In a 2-hour-plus film? Nah. Now the various other elements of the film that are claimed to be moon landing references are, from what I've seen, perceptual projections. In other words, if you weren't looking for a moon landing theme, you wouldn't be seeing a moon landing reference at all. I'll take you through some of the major examples. First, the claim that the letters on the key to room 237 are a coded reference to the words moon room, because those are the only words you can make out of those letters. And it's garbage. As has become a running joke on the subject, you can get the word moron as well. And I'll add to that you can get the words on, or, more, norm, rom, and moo. So it's a really dumb interpretation of the key tag. I mean, it's not even a proper anagram. There are 3 O's on the key, but Moonroom has 4 O's. Next is the claim that the word all in Jack's manuscript actually says A11, meaning Apollo 11. No, the font used in old school typewriters and which is still used in film scripts today is called Courier. The lowercase l's that we see in the word all in Jack's papers are actually L's if you go look at the wiki page about the history of the Courier font. The number 1, when written in Courier, has the top bar angled down. It does not say A11 in Jack's manuscript, it says all. That's why the same shaped lowercase l's appear later in the sentence in the words play and dull. Next, the claim that Stuart Ullman, manager of the hotel, represents John F. Kennedy and the hotel represents America. Well, first of all, I agree that the hotel represents America for reasons outlined in my full article on The Shining, but a reference to America doesn't necessarily mean a reference to the moon landings. It can equally relate to the Native Americans or a whole bunch of other things. Same goes for Kennedy himself. A reference to him might be to his own assassination. Regarding Ullman's appearance, there's a big issue throughout the movie to do with bear-costumed men involved in being sexually abused or becoming abusers. The moon landing interpretations tend to claim that the bear symbolism is to do with the Soviet Union sometimes being referred to as a bear in the Cold War space race. But a bear reference isn't necessarily a reference to the Soviets, hence nobody interprets the movies Bad New Bears or Clan of the Cave Bear as being about the space race. We do actually see a sexual abuse moment involving a bear-costumed character, and when Ullman scratches his face when looking at Danny, his scratch is like Danny's finger-wagging imaginary friend, and that's damn creepy. The deleted scene at the end of the film has Ullman show up in a big bear-like rug of a coat as well. So there is something going on with him, but not necessarily to do with John F. Kennedy. Also, the shrink who sees Danny early in the film has the same kind of shaggy hair, and she doesn't manage the overlook. So, if his appearance means anything, it's more likely that Ullman has shaggy brown hair so that he looks like a bear. Next up, the Kubrick moon landing theories or rumours generally put forward that the twins represent the Gemini project relating to the moon landings. Now, after the Apollo sweater, this is something I consider the most intriguing idea on the moon interpretation subject, but I still think it's garbage. A pair of twins can refer to many things. What about the movies Twins or Twins of Evil? Are they Gemini Project related? I've even had people emailing me claiming that the twins represent the Twin Towers of New York and that the girls murdered on the floor represents the 9/11 attacks. Yeah, in a film made over 20 years before the attacks. We could also say that the twins who do mirror each other and talk in sync represent 2 personalities in one, as in Danny himself who talks to his imaginary friend. I think that's a much more plausible interpretation. But the intriguing part of the theory for me is that a Native American sand painting of figures in blue dress-like costumes is seen above the fireplace here. Now the moon landing take on this is that it's actually rockets and that the fireplace beneath is the ejection of rocket fire. Nice, except the film does have a theme about Native Americans, and sand paintings are typically rocket-like anyway, so that's probably incidental. And the fire beneath, in that context, might represent a native campfire, or even the idea of the figures being roasted over a fire.
They got snowbound one winter in the mountains. They had to resort to cannibalism in order to stay alive.
So I see no reason to think of the twins as a reference to the Gemini project. Maybe if the moon had been visible in the nighttime window behind the twins here, I might lean a little bit towards the theory then. Or if the Gemini horoscope symbol was featured multiple times in the sets or something like that. And last debunking point about The Shining and the moon landing is the room number 237. It's well known that in the novel of The Shining, the haunted room where Danny encounters the bathroom hag was numbered 217, and Kubrick changed it to 237. The general belief is that this was done because there was actually a room 217 at the Timberline Lodge Hotel, which was used for the exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel in the movie. But Jay Widener, who seems to be the central purveyor of the interpretation of the film as a fake moon landing confession, had this to say in the documentary Room 237.
No, that's actually not true. If you call the Mount Hood Resort and you ask for room 217, you will find there is no such room. So that's just not true. That statement's not true. And so Stanley was lying. It's not the reason that he changed the room number from 217 to 237. The reason that he changed it from 217 to 237 was because the room 237 in the film represents the moon landing stage where he worked. And the moon, the standard science textbooks said, and they still say, but now with lasers we've gotten a little better reading, but is that the mean distance of the moon from the Earth is exactly 237,000 miles. So he changed that so that you would understand that this was the moon room.
Now I have a handful of separate sources to debunk that claim. The first is a blueprint for a proposed Timberline Lodge design, which I found and captured years ago on the Timberline Lodge site, but I don't think it's there anymore because the site has changed a lot. Now, I'm not referring to the highlighted section. I didn't put the highlight in, it was there in the original image. The room next to the highlighted one is 217, but on that same blueprint there is no room 237. But of course that is only a proposed design for the building, so it's not reliable as concerned with the finished building. But it's something. My second debunk, and this one you can find online presently, is that at this URL there is a statement on the Timberline Lodge website claiming that the room number was changed at the hotel's request because they were worried guests would avoid staying in room 217, and they didn't actually have a room 237. How ironic though that in the poster that the Timberline have had drawn up for their film festival event, they use a picture of the hotel that has the moon in the sky. Now we could say, oh, the Timberline Lodge are in on the plot and they know it's about the fake moon landings and this is them dropping a hint. But no, their incidental use of the moon, typical in horror stories anyway, only serves to accidentally emphasise that Kubrick didn't show the moon in any of the nighttime shots in The Shining, not even in the end chase sequence, which was outdoors and at night. My third debunk is that on this blog post by a supposed psychic, the author talks about having stayed close to room 217 on a visit. Not the most reliable source, but it's out there. And my last piece of evidence is that way back in November 2008, when I first began researching The Shining, and before the fake moon rumours about The Shining really began to spread, I personally emailed the staff at the Timberline Lodge to ask if there was a room 217, and in that email I iterated to them the point about why the room number was allegedly changed. In their response, they confirmed that there is a room 217. They didn't say, oh yes, we actually have both room numbers. So their response then was in line with what's on their website now. In addition to the stuff about why the room number was changed, the Earth isn't 237,000 miles away from the moon anyway. Its distance changes during its orbit, and the average distance is actually closer to 239,000 miles. This source is from 2013. Now, Widener says that in old astronomy textbooks of the 1970s that it was generally claimed to be 237,000 miles. So I went and checked on the off chance that he might be right. Looking at old science and astronomy sources, I've not found any examples of a 237,000 mile claim from any decade. Here's a paper from 1950 claiming it's 250,000 miles. And here's an excerpt from page 214 of a 1965 book called Curiosities of the Sky, claiming the distance is 220,000 miles. So I think the Room 237 number being a reference to the distance from the Moon to the Earth is total garbage. Okay, those are the main claims I've heard about the film being a fake moon landing confession by Kubrick. And I said that the best and only evidence for the theory is Danny's Apollo 11 sweater lifting off as he stands. It's claimed that the carpet pattern represents the NASA launch pad, but the image similarity is quite vague. In my view, the pattern represents the winding roads on the way to the Overlook Hotel, hence the toy cars, furthering the idea that the hotel is America. And maybe even the yellow ball approaching symbolises the Torrance's yellow car driving to the Overlook. Now, I'm certainly inclined to agree that Kubrick may have been stating with this overall image that the moon landings are the equivalent of a child's fantasy. I say that because there do seem to be implications in some of his other films that he believed the moon landings were faked, not that he staged it. We'll get back to that shortly though. In this context, I think an equally valid interpretation is that the rocket aimed at Danny's face and lifting off represents the sexual abuse of Danny. We do see an image of a bear figure giving fellatio to an older guy. And as I've outlined with a ton of evidence in my video, Jack Torrance, the Abusive Father, there are many implications in the movie that Jack has sexually abused Danny, and that the horror of Room 237 involving an encounter with a naked laughing hag is actually a dream sequence in which Danny recovers his suppressed trauma of sexual abuse. If Danny was forced by Jack to perform fellatio, note the shot similarities here, then the rocket aimed at his mouth is likely to be a phallic metaphor. Now, whether you agree with that or not doesn't really matter. What's important is that it shows that there are other ways of interpreting the meaning of Danny's sweater, that it's not a conclusive fake moon landing metaphor. And then the idea that Room 237 represents the soundstage where the moon landings were supposedly faked makes no sense. There are no moon landing references inside Room 237 at all, none that I can see anyway.
Did you find anything?
No, nothing at all. I didn't see one goddamn thing.
Given all these factors, I don't believe that The Shining was about the moon landings being faked at all. At the very most, the issue of Danny's sweater may have been dropped as a hint of a fake moon landing, but the rest of the film is full of details relating to Native American genocide, the sexual abuse of Danny by his father, America dropping the gold standard, among other things. Those themes are present in many, many details and are backed up by Kubrick archive materials. Alright, so that was all long-winded, but we've got The Shining out the way.